So we're going to be doing a modified motivated sequence to avoid some confusion. So in modified motivated sequence, you still got the 5 steps. But the key difference here is that the attention, the need, and the satisfaction all occur in the introduction. You're going to do these right up front. Grab our need, tell us what the problem is, tell us what we're going to do to fix it, and then move on. And we'll come back to this. The visualization then becomes the body of your speech. So specifically, we're looking for, you're going to have 2 main points. You're going to tell a before story and an after story. Those are your only main points. So the body of this modified motivated sequence, your first point is a before story. And this is what the world looks like now. And so you want to tell us how the world is today, and boy, does it suck. You really want to paint this horrible picture of how bad the world is, because what you're trying to do is change that. And so paint the darkest picture that you possibly can, because then you're going to come back and you're going to say, but if you do what I want you to do, this is what the world will look like. So if we do take the action, here's the after story, and describe to us, how the world will look. And boy, this is going to be great. What you're trying to do is paint your picture of roses and puppy dogs. Everything is hunky-dory if we take the action that you want. And you want to paint these 2 dramatic pictures, because really what you're trying to do is set up a contrast that is so obvious that even somebody who isn't paying attention can realize, oh, I don't want to live in this dark and gloomy world. I want to live in this bright and colorful world. And so that's what you're trying to do, is set up these stories. And so these 2 stories that you're going to tell have to involve individuals. The research shows if you give us a speech about feeding the starving children in Africa, we may give you a little bit of money, but we won't give you very much money. If you tell us there are 10 million starving children in Africa, what does 10 million starving children look like? We can't visualize that. We can't pull that into our head. It's just a number. But if you tell us about one starving child in Africa, and then you tell us about Ubuku, and you tell us Ubuku's story, we can visualize Ubuku, especially if you show us a picture of it. And so by telling us that story of that individual, you're far more likely to get money from us than if you tell us about all of the starving children. You're welcome to tell us that there are 10 million starving children in Africa, but then come back and tell us, but I'm going to tell you the story of Ubuku, and give us his story, because you're going to get far more money from us, or far more action from us, if you just focus on individuals. And these could be individual people or animals. Typically they're people, but if you're trying to save the animals, obviously you're going to talk about saving the animals. But they're going to be individual people or individual animals. And you want to give them names. Names have emotional power, and we resonate with names. And so even if you're talking about saving the whales, give the whales a name. Tell us 2 stories. Tell us a story about Joe, and tell us about Frank. Now, we realize that if you're talking about a whale in the ocean, the other whales don't call him Joe, and the other, call the other guy Frank. We know that, but that doesn't prevent it from resonating with us. So give the people or the animals names. They don't have to be their real names. A lot of people will tell actual stories. Feel free to change the names of the people. And there are multiple ways you can come at this. A lot of people are telling their own personal stories, or stories that are from their own families. And so if you're telling your own story, one way to do it is to, tell us your before story and then tell us your after story. But if you do that, you need to make it very clear in the introduction that, I'm going to tell you, my story. I'm going to tell you about what happened before I did this. I'm going to tell you about what happened after I did this. You have to be extremely clear. An easier way to do that, easier for you and easier for us sometimes, is to give it 2 different names. And so maybe you're going to tell us the before story, and maybe you use your middle name for that. Tell us your after story, maybe use your first name for that if you're willing to disclose that this is you. And then at the end you can tie it together and say, both of these stories are me. You could tell us, I'm going to tell you about Garrett, and I'm going to tell you about Richard. And then you go through and you tell those 2 stories and say, actually both of those are me. So you can do it that way. I've had people, they've done this where they've given themselves kind of fictitious names. There are different ways you can do this, but the key is just focus on individual people, no more than 2. one for the before story, one for the after story, either two people or two animals, and give them names. So that's the body of your speech. And so then in the conclusion, that's, of course, where you're going to call for action. And so we'll talk about each one of these.